Okay, let's continue. The next speaker is Elias Alanko from 3-Step IT, talking about BEC and invoice fraud.
Yep.
You can introduce yourself.
Thanks, Keijo. I'd say me and Keijo go quite way back in history. Both of us could be considered as some sort of a finance industry veterans and have some sort of background in anti-fraud activities. I worked for different finance industry companies for roughly 15 years and was responsible for a lot of anti-fraud activities back in the previous decade. Then I got a bit bored because the online banking phishing is the very same thing repeating itself one way or another time after time. And then I ended up in a company called 3-Step IT. To the title, what the BEC II? This is sequel. I suppose this might actually be the first sequel in HelSec history. What the BEC I premiered roughly 1 year ago when Niklas from Kone held a BEC team presentation which focused more on the type of attacks where the scammers try to take a hold of a corporate email box, and once they get hold of that, what they do. And then I thought that okay, maybe I can introduce to you the kind of other side of the coin, the type of business email compromise attacks that are really, really low key when it comes to technological skills. And they focus mostly on different kind of social engineering tricks, so that you hopefully get an idea that in order to be a successful invoice fraudster, you don't have to be very technical. Then a few words about the company, 3-Step IT, as it's not necessarily familiar to all of you. Those of you who are basketball fans, you might have seen the company logo on these kind of jerseys and wondered maybe that what the heck, who are them? Well, we are 3-Step IT. We are a technology lifecycle management company. We are business to business only, so we don't do any retail business. We help our customers to acquire IT equipment, manage it, and safely dispose it. And those of you who happen to be interested in data sanitization, we might have a new opening coming up soon. I'd say I'm a bit disappointed that I cannot fully say that we would have such an opening, but still thought of mentioning that highly likely we'll have a new role with regards to that, and that will be like highly technical position. We operate in all of Nordics, revenue around 800 million euros, which makes us size-wise, when measured by revenue, like top 10 IT company in Finland. And how this all links to business email compromise? Well, it means that there's a lot of invoices that we handle, which also means that we are a fairly lucrative target for the business email compromise scammers. Then let's continue to the actual business email compromise. I thought of starting out with a bit of terminology, as I'm not fully satisfied how these terms are used in the public. So bear in mind that for some reason business email compromise is used as some sort of an umbrella term that covers multitude of different digital corporate fraud schemes. I find it a bit misleading that in reality, many of those fraud schemes don't actually require a compromised email box, meaning that some external party has actually access to some of your employees' inboxes. That's really not required. Sometimes it's helpful, but it's not required. And also I dislike the part business email. The fraud is not limited to business email alone. The scammers are really innovative. They use private emails, phone calls, SMS, social media. You can even get fraudulent invoices via physical mail. So let's not limit ourselves there either. But this is what we got. Then the second part, as said, the BEC kind of scheme consists of multiple categories. Today I thought of discussing the two primary ones. Some of you could be of the opinion that there are actually 6 or 7 categories. That's completely fine. I just don't have enough time today to discuss all of them. The first one is CEO fraud. Who has heard of CEO fraud before? Yay! That's very common. That's the fraud type that people in general know. So it's CEO, CFO, or some executive level person that the criminal is portraying, and then tries to convince some employee, typically from finance department, to do something silly, ranging from purchasing a low-value gift card to sending tens of millions of euros to an incorrect bank account. What I dislike about the CEO fraud term, or the toimitusjohtajapetos term in Finnish, is that especially the Finnish media tends to label all BEC fraud schemes under the name toimitusjohtajapetos, CEO fraud, although in reality the fraud type could be something else that has nothing to do with CEO fraud. But hey, let's take an example. So I took the liberty of taking some real life examples from our database with some sanitization involved, of course. This is a really simple case. Criminal is portraying as Carmen, CEO of one of our group companies, and approaching an employee of us with this message that, hey, I have some urgent things to do, could you help me out? The interesting thing here is that the criminal is approaching our employee's private Gmail account, not the corporate account. Therefore, we in security have no visibility into this traffic. So that's kind of cool. Our employee at the time was sitting in a bus in a morning rush, looking at the email from her mobile phone screen. Didn't first get that, okay, this is a hoax. She replied something like, Carmen, could you send this email to my corporate email box? We don't do that in private emails. The security has said that, well, we don't do this stuff in private emails. And then the criminal responded that, blah, 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 could you get me a gift card from 7-Eleven or something like that? And then the person realized that, okay, this is a scam. I need to report it to security. Then in security, we try to kind of CVSS rate or grade these attacks so that we can distinguish that what's skilled and what's less skilled. So these type of scenarios we grade around 6. Fairly elementary, low chance of success. But then it makes at least me wonder that why do the criminals do this? Why do they do such elementary stuff? if it doesn't work. I'm thinking, well, it has to work, otherwise they wouldn't do it. And turns out that when I was browsing the internet and finalizing my slide, I actually came up with this piece of news from the Finnish broadcasting company, which says that at the University of Eastern Finland there was a fairly recent campaign where someone was portraying as a professor and sent these kind of emails to the members of their research group, and actually someone fell for it. Why? It's based on the article, the language quality was a bit better, and that was enough to be successful. Why do people do this? Well, in general, people want to help people who are in distress. So even this low-level stuff works. Then let's continue with the terminology. So as I said, we're going to talk about two key fraud types today, and the second one is invoice fraud, laskutuspetos in Finnish. These are the fraud cases where the fraudster contacts your finance department and says that, hey, I'm your supplier, we have a new bank account, please change the bank account number, and then the money starts flowing into the incorrect account. This is, for example, a fraud type that does not have anything to do with the previous CEO fraud scheme. But for some reason, when I read about cases in Finnish news, the title can say that CEO fraud, and then in reality is invoice fraud. But hey, let's focus on this one. And then final terminology slide. One term that I'd like to introduce to you, I'm not sure whether everyone is familiar with the concept of pretexting. At least to me, it's like fairly new term or not that very commonly used. We tend to talk about phishing, but not pretexting. And I'd say in a way the difference between phishing and pretexting is that in many cases, if you are being phished, the criminal is trying to obtain credentials. Whereas if the attack is of pretexting type, there's highly likely no credential phishing involved, but it's just rather a piece of story, convincing story that is used to manipulate the victim. It can be based on leveraging existing email threads, but it can just be like completely made up. And again, let's have a look at real life example. A member of our finance team was approached by KPMG. Mr. Ian Greenwood was of the opinion that we have a due invoice. We haven't paid that. I was asking that, could you please pay it? And the person in our finance team who received it analyzed this email. Eventually sent it to security. But can you guess why? What struck the finance person's attention? Yes. No phone number. Good one, yes. Invoice number, you're correct. I mean, I understand that most of you probably realize that that's not the correct domain. But if you have finance person's mindset, you look at the invoice number and then you go to the invoicing system. Do we have this reference number? No, we don't. Let's report this to security team. There's something odd. I cannot locate this invoice. Well, we do a bit of analysis. That's a real person, can be found from LinkedIn, so some OSINT has been done. Domain, I mean, it's pretty good. Registered mid-August last year, email was sent at the end of the August. So this is how the criminals operate. They can rather easily set up lookalike domains, which means in turn that they don't need to spoof email addresses. They have their own domains. And non-techies, for them, this is close enough. And I can say that portraying as Big Four companies or global legal firms, that's fairly common tactic. We get these kind of emails once a month. It can be KPMG, Deloitte, DLA Piper, and so forth. But they fail at this level with us. But still, like, great. Well, I give this 7 minus. It's still better than the previous one. But let's continue with this example. What if the invoice number had been correct? I'd say that would hike the chances of this fraud type being successful. Then I would give like maybe 8+. Then what if invoice number would have been correct and the email would originate from a correct hijacked email account? Well, I'd again hike the score, like maybe 9 minus. And then finally, let's add the third part. In addition to additions 1 and 2, what if the recipient would be a new finance team member? Hasn't received any dedicated anti-phishing, anti-fraud training? What if the rest of the team would be on summer holidays? That person would be there on her own. What if this kind of message would hit a company that wouldn't have a security team that the finance team could reach out to? I mean, could that be a 10? Possibly. And this is how criminals make money. But still, like even this one, like it's still like fairly simple scheme. So let's go to case number 3. Maybe even more sophisticated invoice fraud attempt. This is something that I've crafted based on generally known criminal modus operandi. So there I unfortunately don't have screenshots of a successful attack, but let's see how this example would work with you. So let's assume that we have supplier.com and Bob working for the finance team. Then we have customer.com and Alice working for their finance team. And then we have Eve, the cyber criminal. And Eve wants to make money. What does Eve do? Well, first she does a bit of recon. She has magical ops skills, and she's able to find out that supplier and customer have a business relationship. Wow. Typically, these are like fairly straightforward. If you have a car manufacturer and a steel factory, it's kind of the car manufacturer buys steel from the steel factory, and the steel factory, if it's a stock listed company, they probably announce it in some press release that, hey, we got this deal from the car company, and then basically anyone knows. And of course, like many companies in general list reference customers on their web pages because it's good for business. So it's not really that difficult for an attacker to find out that, hey, who does business with whom. Then Eve follows up, conducts some sophisticated searches, and finds out that Alice works for customer comes finance team. So in reality, she just Googles for LinkedIn accounts and blah, blah, blah. It's really not that sophisticated. People are in LinkedIn, and you really cannot tell your finance teams that, hey, you cannot have a LinkedIn account. That's just not possible. So I'd say you just have to accept that the criminals can find out at least some of the stuff in your finance teams. And then Eve has to be skilled enough to register lookalike domains. Let's take in this case, for the sake of simplicity, that she's able to register lookalike domains supplier1.com and customer1.com. Good enough. Then Eve knows that finance teams in general use these standard email boxes that are typically called finance or invoicing. So what she does is that she starts portraying as the customer.com and sends from her lookalike domain, customer1.com, an email to the supplier.com finance team that, hey, this is Alice from customer. We had some problems with our recent ERP update, and we are really not sure what kind of open invoices we have. Well, who wouldn't have problems with ERP updates? I mean, you know, that's life. Well, the message goes to Bob in supplier.com, and Bob just misses that the message is coming from a lookalike domain, and he responds that, hey, Alice, sorry to hear, technical problems. Here you go, here's the 12 months worth of invoicing history, and you actually have 5 outstanding payments. It's worth 45,000 euros, VAT 0. There you go. And then we can think here that, oh no, Bob, what are you doing? This is dangerous. This is actually data leak. Crap. But Eve is happy. She's getting what she's requesting. What happens then is that Eve switches hats. She starts portraying Bob. And as you can guess, at this stage, she would actually have access to correct Bob's email signatures and so forth, because she has already been exchanging emails with Bob. And now she approaches Alice from the supplier1.com lookalike domain, and, you know, to put it blankly, states that we are in the process of changing our bank account. And Bob, as you know, we have these 5 invoices outstanding with the following reference numbers and so forth. So kind of just to make sure that the money flows to the correct bank account, could you switch the current bank account number to XXXXX? Alice gets the email, and she really has no reason to believe that it's fake. Actually, the message contact is perfect because the invoice numbers match. The sender must be real because the sender knows confidential data. And that's enough. Alice kindly switches the bank account number and replies to Bob, also known as Eve, that, yeah, the account number has been now switched. It's XXX. There you go. Eve gets the money, heads to the Bahamas with the criminal proceedings. And then what happens is that in reality, few weeks pass. And then Bob realizes that, hey, I haven't gotten the funds. Where are they? Now these payments have expired. She tries to contact Alice using the existing email chains, but Alice does not respond anymore. Then at some point, Bob's manager gets frustrated. You have to do something about it, and then kind of Bob looks up the official generic email address that the customer.com uses and says that, hey, what's wrong? You have 5 outstanding payments. Why you haven't paid them? Do we have a problem here? And then the message reaches the actual customer.com, who'll then find out that, well, we have paid those invoices, but seemingly to a wrong account. Typically at this point, security is contacted, police contacted, bank is alerted, and so forth. But since the duration between the transfer of the funds and the company realizing that they have been frauded is at least days, but typically weeks, and it can be even months, the money is gone for good. And it's that simple. This is how the scammers make money. So how can we protect ourselves then? Few pointers there. I'd say deploy all possible technical controls out there. Of course, you probably understand that parts of these scams are made with such a fashion that technical controls just to some degree are useless, but not completely useless. So understand that criminals do evasive maneuvers. They register their own domains, so they don't really need to spoof any email addresses. They can use the hijacked business accounts, but they are obviously more difficult to obtain, especially with everyone having MFAs in place, I'd assume. The criminals utilize other channels. It's not just the business email. And you as blue teamers might have no visibility into those channels. And also, to understand that the attack can start with data exfiltration that happens with your providers. And your opportunities to control that are fairly limited. You can, of course, have contractual requirements that everyone who does business with us needs to have specific fraud trainings to their finance teams and so forth. And I can say that out of our customer base, if we have a larger customer that has operations in the USA or originates from USA, surprise, surprise, they have these kind of requirements. Because this is a really big problem in the States. And therefore, it's meaningful to say that do educate your personnel to recognize these kind of attacks. Not just the kind of typical phishing, don't click on a link, don't open up attachment. Teach them also these schemes that don't require clicking a link and so forth. Use real-life scenarios. What we do is that we have local finance teams in each of the Nordics, and we have an agreement with them that whenever they get a suspicious email or suspicious contact, there's no barrier blocking them from contacting security. They said that it's completely fine if you contact us with suspicious email that turns out to be a legit email. That is completely fine. And therefore they contact us a lot. And then we also have an agreement in place that we have this shared team space. And all the regional teams have access to that space. And whenever someone from some country reports something useful, we make this kind of awareness article that, hey, Norway got this kind of fraudulent attempt. It looks like this. And then try to explain that if you do this and that and that and that, the criminal would do this and that and blah, 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 blah. And they like it. If you don't do this, give it a try. Controls continued. As you probably realized, this is very largely a process issue. So the finance teams would really need to go through how to manage these special situations. It's not like very common for a supplier to change their bank account number. It happens, but it's not that frequent. There can be M&A situations. There can be overdue payments. And it will be really important to have the discussion with the finance team leads that, hey, how do you manage these kind of situations? And especially, like, what kind of principles they have. Is there some sort of 4I principle that certain actions no one is allowed to do alone? I'd highly recommend that no finance team nowhere has such a process where a single person would be allowed to change supplier bank account number. Because it's not fair from that individual finance team employee's perspective that if he or she gets frauded, which for sure can happen because these fraudsters are professionals, that's their trade, that they kind of need to take the blame and the heat that, hey, you there alone did this one mistake and it costed the company hundreds of thousands of euros, millions, and so forth. That's just not fair. Don't let that happen in your organizations. And I'd say these control points within the finance processes are highly likely the strongest control points that you can build to defend yourselves against business email compromise. Then fourthly, check your insurance cover. And do also note that if you have cyber insurance cover, it may not cover the situations where the BEC scammer does not deploy any kind of phishing or malware. The insurance company will say that, hey, that person just emailed you and then you handed out the money. That's not cybercrime. It's not covered. Typically, larger organizations have also so-called crime insurance, and crime insurance typically covers fraud. But there it's important to understand what's the lower and upper limit of that insurance. You all have some sort of retail insurance cover, and you're probably used to having lower limits around 100, 200 euros. In a corporate setting, that kind of limits are unfeasible because the insurance would be astronomically expensive. So I'd say you can assume that if your company has a crime insurance, the lower limit is probably something like 100,000 euros, upper limit something like 1 million euros. And then whether that is a good fit or bad fit, that's something that you might also gonna maybe challenge the finance department a bit that, hey, what do we have at stake in reality? Then finally, let's have a look at global and local impact. So what kind of damages we see, and what do the statistics look like? Let's start off with Verizon's data breach report 22. There they have studied that out of their data set, these pretexting based schemes presented 27% out of the all social engineering breaches. If we take a look at Verizon's 23 report, it looks like this. The share has doubled, and this pretexting is present in more than half of different social engineering breaches that they have in their dataset. To me, this tells that the criminals have realized that this is low-tech yet easy way of making money. So we will see more and more these type of attempts. Then we have the FBI and their Internet Complaint Center statistic, and also I took this IBM's cost of data breach report. IBM says that BE scams are number 2 when it comes to the most expensive security incidents in their data set, $4.89 US, and then for some reason phishing is the number 1 with slightly higher amount. I don't know what's behind these numbers. To me, they are a bit high. It's like, if it's like 4 million per case, that's a lot. To me, I'd say in European or Finnish setting, the average damage is probably in the tens of thousands of euros or hundreds of thousands of euros, not in the millions, but maybe in the States everything is bigger.
IBM factors in cost of litigation, compensation to PII losses, etc., etc., etc. So the actual BEC scam might be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but then the add-on expenses on top of investigating, litigating, etc., etc. And you know how, for example, Mandiant bills, and you know how American lawyers bill.
Yeah. So we got the explanation from the audience with regards to why this is 4 million euros. So the explanation was that IBM factors in not just the direct costs, but also the costs involved in litigation and consultancy work, finding out what's happened and so forth. And then we have the FBI's Internet Complaint Center. So their statistics say that in 22 alone, US companies and individuals in total lost $2.7 billion. And between 2013 and 2021, the total losses that their statistics sees that covers both the US and non-US organization total $16 billion. That's like insane amounts of money. Then let's turn our eyes to Finland. Here are some public cases. You can see that the FBI's data set began from 2013. That's like when this phenomenon started growing. And then from Finland, you can see that the first cases are from 2015. So that was the duration that it kind of took for this phenomenon to reach Finland. And yeah, the biggest losses are quite hefty. And these are, of course, only the public ones, and the ones that are public are pretty largely based on the fact that the victims have been either publicly listed companies or government organizations. But then in addition, I would like to highlight Algol, smaller company who was struck back in 2018. They had no obligation to make this public, but they thought that sharing information is more important than being worried about possible reputational impacts. And they took this to publicity, and National Cybersecurity Center awarded them with this Information Security suunnannäyttäjä award, which is, I think, the right thing to do. Then you can say, okay, your cases are from 2015, 2019, and so forth. Is this a problem nowadays? Like, this is low-level stuff. Have companies learned anything? Well, not really. This is something that I took from Ilta-Sanomat news article back in February. And there, Mr. Jukka-Pekko Risu from Helsinki Police Department, with whom I've done quite a lot of business, declares that some company lost 100,000 euros based on a WhatsApp message. Another one 750,000 euros, one 40,000 euros, one 600,000 euros. So we have all these like fairly large cases, but they don't come into the public light with this kind of who was hit, what was the name of the organization. And that's like, I mean, it's everyone's own choice whether they want to make this public or not. I'm like, do what you want, but seemingly this is a problem that continues to exist. And I say from my point of view, my take is that I don't understand ransomware. If you are a criminal who wants to make money, to me ransomware makes very little sense because it's extremely noisy and difficult way of making money compared to the business email compromise fraud, which is fairly silent. Ransomware is some big organization and you have all the attention of law enforcement on your back. BEC fraud, less likely I'd say. But let's have a look at what do business email criminal suspects look like. Meet Mr. Woodbury. If you have an Instagram account, that account still exists. I checked before the presentation. So this is Mr. I don't know how to pronounce that name, Jacob Ponnell, 29 years of age, originally from Nigeria. The guy has managed to fraud different companies and individuals for over tens of millions of US dollars. Luckily he was caught in the States because the penalty can be up to 20 years. I checked that he's been now sentenced once to 8 years penalty, but you know, as in the States he faces multiple other criminal proceedings, and opposed to what we do in Finland, they kind of put a lot more years on the sentence, whereas in Finland he might get like maybe additional crimes with a discount a few months. And I'm not saying like which one is right or wrong, but this is what it is. And like the person owned like luxury watches, high-end cars and so forth that the FBA was managed to confiscate from Dubai. So they will get some money back, but still like this is crazy stuff. You fraud people and then you set up an Instagram account where you lead like really flamboyant life, and like the guy is like a public figure in Nigeria and a criminal. Doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't get it. And by the way, this data is from Mr. Gary Warner of University of Alabama, who does a lot of research with regards to these criminal schemes. So if you happen to have the opportunity of seeing Gary present something like take a shot. And then, meanwhile, in Finland, for example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was 400,000 euros, and our outcome was that the investigation was dropped because there was no suspect to identify. and this is sad, and I'd really hope that the European Union would do something about this, so that the law enforcement would be better equipped to tackle this threat, identify the criminals, bring them to justice. Then to summary. So what I hope that you take away from this presentation is that you'd identify business email compromise as significant source of risk. I encourage you to defend against the general forms of phishing, but do also think about this pretexting. But how do you tackle that one? You cannot tackle it with technical controls. If you think that your organization would benefit from having a presentation like this, reach out to me. I'll assist if I have time. And that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
So yeah, we have lots of comments and questions. So first one.
For moving the money away from the control of police for it to be returned, what kind of capabilities are needed, and is this a service that you can easily buy from the criminal market?
I'd say you can use regular bank accounts, I'm afraid. But you just establish a bank account in, let's say, UK, Germany, transfer the funds there. Once they are there, transfer them to a third account, let's say in Spain, then transfer them to the States and so forth. And if banks or the law enforcement start chasing you, whenever a country border is crossed, it makes the kind of communication legal-wise very complicated. And they just cannot keep up, I'm afraid. So you can use, in a way, regular bank accounts. Of course, banks have their AML controls and so forth. They do their best, but it's like really difficult task for the banks also to identify that if someone wants to open up a new bank account, is that a fraudster or a legit business, for example.
So the next one.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. In the same vein as the previous question, surely every, at least regular bank account is tied to a name, so law enforcement could just look at whose name it's opened in and, I don't know, take the funds from that person or chase down that person.
Yeah. You're correct. The problem is that criminals have this hierarchy, that the criminal kingpins do not register the bank accounts themselves. They use like low-level petty criminals to register those accounts. And those criminals in turn are seasoned enough that when police gets a hold of them, they for sure don't reveal the names of the people higher up in the organization, because I suppose the punishment could be quite severe from the criminal organization in turn.
There is even no need to be a low-level criminal. You can just tactics are like grabbing some bomb from the street to a mic and lose over him and getting the bank account.
So do we have any comments? Yeah, we have at least one. And I assume Jiri has something to say.
Yeah, one question or comment. So basically, I wonder what kind of effort is bank doing on to prevent this kind of things, because now in the previous presentation we just saw that we have this now sophisticated machine learning and these kind of things are just is easily like detected with just outlier things in machine learning. So is there any input from bank itself? They can even sell the service to this kind of things.
Yeah. So since I don't work for a bank anymore, I of course cannot give fully exhaustive response to this one. But I'd say it's generally known that larger banks do deploy all sorts of AML and anti-fraud data analytics systems. I'd say one caveat coming from people who do not work for bank and do not understand corporate or retail payments is that these aren't really outliers. It's completely normal for especially mid-size or larger company to make a lot of foreign transactions, and they can be of quite high value. So in a way, I understand that one can think that they are outliers, but in reality they are not. And then the caveat from banks' perspective is that if banks starts stopping these transactions, they will be stopping a lot of legit transactions, which will in turn cause harm for those businesses who are trying to trade something. So it's a difficult position for the banks as well, I'm afraid. Jiri's question quota is limited to one.
And not that much of a question, but a common remark or a note, if you will. So if you hear this kind of presentations, you might think of yourself as a victim or your company as a victim. But I'm sure that everyone us here and our companies has taken care of security pretty good. At least I trust so. And our customers, and we're working for IT industry, etc., etc. But there are lots of different industries. There are lots of basic industries which are known aware of this kind of thing happening. So think again, if you can ingest this information here, it's good. But if you can deliver this information further to those industries, like basic industries working with the metal or whatever, building things, basic industries in Finland, which we have a lot. Please deliver this information to them. It helps a lot.
Excellent presentation, I must say. And I was smiling because you brought up 2 points I wanted to ask you. For example, internal auditing and security, they could work together. And the business controller, for example, those three persons, and the controller in a bigger company, they are having, let's say, maybe 15 could be all around when you mentioned the Nordics and the Baltics. So I think my opinion is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's a lack of communication within those three groups that everyone keeps, it's like USA, we have the FBI, CIA, and the Secret Service, and no one tells, it's need to know basis. So I think in big companies also they play that I got a secret, And so please, can you elaborate for us? Thank you.
Yeah. I'd say these type of fraud schemes are easily of the such type that they in a way fall between the chairs. If you're into information security, it's like, hey, my responsibility is to deploy these technical controls. Internal audit might be interested in maybe internal fraud more than this type of fraud cases, and then the finance department might be completely unaware of these kind of attacks. So yeah, sharing is caring. That's my message.
Okay, the last one.
All right. So initially, I wanted to ask whether investing with a Nigerian prince was a good idea, but apparently not. So moving on, my first question is whether cyber insurance fraud actually happens, like normal insurance fraud. And my second question is for a friend. It's hypothetical. Do you have any way on how to start the BEC model? But that's, again, hypothetically speaking.
I have to say that for the cyber insurance fraud part, I just don't know. It might exist, but I just don't know, and I don't know how to get started. I suppose this is like somewhat of good 101, but use this information in a kind way, not in an evil way. Sorry. I don't know. Let's discuss that over beers.
Okay, let's give a big hand to Elias.